What's up, Abroaders? I hope you are all doing well. If you are new to my channel, my name is Andrea René and welcome to my channel, Andrea René Abroad, where I talk about Peace Corps, travel, and working abroad. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Nicaragua from August of 2016 to April of 2018, and I am now living and working in Melbourne, Australia, as an au pair. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about how to apply to become an au pair. If you have not seen the video on how to apply to become an au pair, I'm gonna go ahead and link that one up above. I think it's super important for you to watch that one first so that this one makes sense. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the interview process and how to select a family. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to kind of go through the process that I went through and also provide you all with a few tips for how to best select a family to au pair for. In the previous video, I got to the point where I pointed out the message board on the Au Pair World website. So once you have gotten to a point where you have different families reaching out to you and you are beginning to look at their profiles and kind of starting to think about whether or not they would be a good match for you or not, you'll ultimately find a few families who you do think could be possible candidates for an au pair family. You're going to want to read through each of their profiles and see if the families align with your values, your needs, and also check out where they live in the country that you're interested in. So for example, when I was applying to be an au pair, I was pretty open initially to going to any city here in Australia, as long as I was in Australia. I looked at Perth, I looked at Sydney, I looked at Adelaide, I looked at Melbourne, and I ultimately ended up picking Melbourne because I had heard a lot of rumors that Melbourne was kind of like the Portland, Oregon of Australia. And having just spent 2 years in Nicaragua in a culture that was completely different from my own, I liked the idea of being in a city in a different country, but having it still be a little bit familiar to me and kind of having, just that general sense of familiarity. Once you have narrowed down what country you are in, you're going to want to do what I was doing. You're going to want to check out the different cities that the different families live in. And I would not narrow down your options too quickly. I think, for example, if you're planning to go to Ireland or to England or to Germany, allow yourself to get solicitations from families from anywhere in those countries or in the country that you are applying for first. And then after that, you can begin to narrow it down, do research, decide which city you want to be in. So that's a really huge part of it, is choosing the city. Now, once you have narrowed it down to a few families, you are going to want to actually have a conversation with them. Most au pair candidate families will either ask you for your email or your WhatsApp number. If you don't know what WhatsApp is, and I've spelled it down below for all of you to look up, it's an application where you can make international calls to anybody in the world for free, video or audio. You can also send text messages, voice messages. It's just an incredible app. Now, I'm gonna jump back to my own experience here. So I narrowed down the families to a family in Melbourne and a family in Sydney. And I was really okay with either city because I knew that those were really big cities at the time. So one of the families I communicated with via email and Skype, and the other family I communicated with via WhatsApp. Only WhatsApp, we never exchanged emails just because WhatsApp, we can do everything from messaging to video and voice calls. So that was really nice. So let me start by saying that both of these families had an au pair in the past, and that was really appealing to me because I like to walk into something with a little bit more structure. So I liked the idea that they had already had an au pair before, and they had both actually already had American au pairs before as well. So that was appealing to me as well. I knew I would not be a new culture stepping into their home. I would at least be somewhat familiar to them. My accent would be familiar to them. My mannerisms would be familiar to them. So that idea was appealing to me. So let me first tell you about the family that I communicated with via email and Skype. The children were a little bit older. Honestly, age was not an issue for me, but Obviously, for some of you, age might be an issue, so be sure that you take that into consideration when you're selecting a family. The family from Sydney was extremely organized, which I really, really loved and was immediately appealing to me. They were upfront about how much money I would make each week. They were upfront that I would be getting a SIM card, that I would be driving. It was just all very, very clearly laid out. The family in Melbourne, things were also clear, but I did have to ask a little bit more questions. Obviously, you all know I ultimately picked them. But anyways, getting back to it, so the family from Sydney ended up sending me a list of questions that they wanted me to answer prior to us having a Skype meeting. A lot of families will do this. Before I narrowed it down to these two families, I did actually get a list of questions from a few different families, some of which I decided to respond, others I didn't because I'd kind of already eliminated them as candidates. But the family in Sydney sent me a list of questions, and I did end up answering all of them before our Skype meeting. So let me go ahead and read to you all the questions that I received from this family, just so you can get a sense of what sort of questions you might get from the family you are going to be interviewing with. So some of the questions they asked me are, what are your hobbies and interests? Do you play any instruments? Do you play any sports? Can you tell me more about your family and your relationship with them? How do you feel about being so far away from your family for so long? What do you want to get out of your au pair experience? What are your expectations with regard to being part of our family? What is your biggest concern or fear about being an au pair? Do you have any allergies or dietary restrictions? What kind of foods do you like to eat? How do you feel about cooking? Do you drive regularly? What car do you usually drive? Have you had any accidents? Are you able to swim? Is religion important to you? Are you a morning person? Are you able to start your day early? Would you say in general that you are very tidy, neat enough, or a little messy? Are there any particular reasons that you feel drawn to working with our family? So those are the questions that I got from the family from Sydney. Now, some of you might be like, whoa, that's a lot of questions. But remember that you are someone who is coming not only from another country, but you're a stranger to this family during the au pair world process. All they know about you is what you put on your profile. So maybe some of these questions that I just shared with all of you might give you ideas for how to set up your own profile on aupairworld.com. Maybe you'll just be upfront about some of those things so you don't have to answer them later in the interview process. I know some of them can be kind of awkward. Sometimes people feel kind of put on the spot if they have to talk about their dietary restrictions, but you know, these are important things, and remember, you will be living in the home with the family, so I think all of these questions are completely valid. You're going to be taking care of their children. They want to know more about you. So I answered all those questions for the family in Sydney, and then we scheduled a Skype meeting, and it honestly went quite well. It actually was really hard for me to pick between the family from Sydney and the family from Melbourne. The exact same weekend, I had both the Skype interview and the WhatsApp interview with the person who is ultimately now my host mom here in Melbourne, Australia. I had interviews with each of those families, the Melbourne family and the Sydney family, on the same weekend, pretty much back-to-back interviews actually. And the interview with the family from Melbourne went quite well. I met one of their children while we were talking, and then in the Sydney family one, I actually met the entire family, husband, all three kids, and the mom. All of them were there for the interview. Some of the kids, since they were older kids, the Sydney family, they were asking me questions as well. Again, it was really hard for me to pick. In the end, the reason why I ultimately picked the family from Melbourne is because what I said earlier. Melbourne just seemed to be a place that was very similar to my hometown of Portland, Oregon. And so I felt that I would maybe perhaps be more comfortable there. And remember, this was after 2 years again, of living in Nicaragua, where I was completely out of my comfort zone. And I honestly just needed a break. And I wanted to give myself a chance to still be abroad, but have a little bit, something that was a little bit more familiar. The family that I ultimately picked here in Melbourne, you know, they live equidistance from the city center as I did in Portland from downtown. They seem to be about the same socioeconomic status as I am in the United States. So there was just like a lot of things that seemed familiar to me. They were a city family. The Sydney family was a suburban family, and I never really had identified with people in the suburbs as much. I just wanted to pick something that was familiar to me. You can go both ways, right? You can pick something that's very unfamiliar to you, like I did with Peace Corps Nicaragua, or you can pick something that's really familiar to you. And this can go both ways. You know, if it's your first time ever outside of your country, you know, maybe you are up for that challenge of picking something completely different, but maybe you just want to start slow and pick something that's kind of familiar to you. After I had the 2 interviews, I talked with my friends and my family about each of the families, and pretty much all of them thought that the Melbourne family was a better fit for me, and I really valued their opinion, and so that is ultimately who I ended up going with. Now, I did forget to mention before, both of the families, the Melbourne family and the Sydney family, gave me the contact information of their previous au pairs, so I had the opportunity to email and text their previous au pairs just to get kind of like, they vouched for the families, right? So I wasn't completely going into it blindsided. I was able to talk to, you know, Americans who had lived and worked with each of these families. And I actually video called the au pair who served for the Melbourne family, which was really great, super helpful. I really recommend that you ask for the contact information of their former au pairs. I think that pretty much covers the interview process, and like I said, I ultimately ended up picking the Melbourne family, as you know. Let me know if you have any questions below. If you have not yet followed me on Instagram, I would love for you to follow me on Instagram. I post daily photos, and I also frequently upload stories where you can get a better peek into my life as an au pair. I also have a blog. I'll link both the blog and the Instagram account in the description below. If you would like more information from me, those are the best 2 places to find out more about my life as an au pair and my former life as a Peace Corps volunteer. I hope this video was helpful. If it was helpful, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, I would love for you to subscribe. All right, talk to you all next week.